Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of CFL 110 here on the Winnipeg Sports Talk Network as we count down to Labor Day weekend and some of the biggest rivalry games of the season in the Canadian Football League. Andrew Paterson with you. We'll bring in Jeff Hamilton from the Winnipeg Free Press in just a minute. Do want to thank our great partners at CoolBet Canada for their support of WST and, of course, CFL 110. And let you know that new CoolBet programming, football of the four-down nature, is coming starting on Fridays and throughout the NFL season. Our NFL picks show weekly, 10 a.m. right here live on YouTube on Winnipeg Sports Talk. But for right now, we focus in on the biggest weekend of the regular season in the Canadian Football League. And welcome in Jeff Hamilton from the Free. Hammer, what's going on, man? How are you?
Not too bad, my friend. We were just talking off mic about my weekend, and I couldn't really recall much that I did outside of obviously watching these games, many of which were surprising, exciting, all the above. But I think I think my lack of, not memory on this past weekend, but excitement is just a precursor to the massive weekend ahead of us here for what you mentioned, Labor Day weekend. It is, outside of the Grey Cup week, the most exciting week in the Canadian Football League season, certainly one of the more exciting weeks in the regular season. So I'm looking forward to teeing those games up and still reliving some of the games we just watched here, Huss.
Well, and you know, we will get to our game picks with the lines over at CoolBet at the end. There is 3 games coming up this weekend. One quick note just before we dive in, and I knew you mentioned this. This is something we've talked about on the show for the last couple of years. It kind of seems incomplete with 3 teams on the bye, and I would hope that in the future they try to get what we have going on here on the prairies between the Bombers and Riders and what they have in Alberta with the Stamps and the Elks, and of course what they have in Southern Ontario with the Argos and the Ticats, going with the Montreal Alouettes and the Ottawa Redblacks. It seems too logical, and to be honest, it's a bit of a head scratcher that hasn't happened. Nobody cared about BC Montreal. That was not an annual rivalry game. Ottawa Montreal really could be. And yet it's not on the slate this weekend.
Yeah, I thought they made the right decision by eliminating that. To your point, there really wasn't much excitement between the BC Lions and the Montreal Alouettes. There literally is not a larger geographical distance between any other team than those 2 teams, right? You have your furthest east and your furthest west. And I think what makes your other point disappointing is that you have arguably the closest distance outside of obviously Toronto and Hamilton, just being down the highway. It's a 90-minute drive from Montreal to Ottawa. And I feel like, you know, making it a 3-game schedule is, I don't want to say bad enough as it's like the worst thing in the world. It's not, but not being able to have that 4-game sched, those 2, you know, back-to-back doubleheaders on Sunday and Monday, and adding a new rivalry to that mix. I know I mentioned this on Twitter the other days, and I got a lot of positive feedback and saying, yeah, I agree. I think, you know, I do agree it was a missed opportunity, whatnot. But then I got a couple comments saying, well, if you've ever been to Ottawa, you know there's not much of a rivalry, you know, against Montreal. I have lived in Ottawa for 4 years. I spent 4 years there for school, and I admit Ottawa fans are arguably some of the worst fans in the entire nation. I'm not saying that as a red-black shot. I mean that as that's just the reputation Ottawa fans have. So there aren't a lot of rivalries. I love Ottawa. It's one of my favorite cities, if not my favorite city in Canada. And the Red Blacks fans are massive fans. I do think they would step up for a game like that. I know there's another game, and the other argument I got, Huss, was, well, this is the Canadian Thanksgiving game. Well, hey, sorry to break this to you. There can be multiple games against 2 teams, and you could have them on both the Labor Day weekend and Thanksgiving weekend. I think that would be more than a great game, and you can create this rivalry. I think creating rivalry games is super important, and you know Montreal is not going to jump on one of those other teams outside of Ottawa. That's really the only option they have for a rivalry. So I do think it was a missed opportunity. Hopefully, you know, we make a lot of this schedule stuff, Haas, and what we ignore is the fact that it's difficult to put these games together. You have 9 different teams that have 9 different priorities, but I hope the league next year makes this one a priority and makes that Labor Day weekend back to a 4-game sched and right what's been a long time wrong and pin the Montreal Alouettes against the Ottawa Redblacks.
Well, just to circle back to a conversation we had over the last couple of weeks about you know, the Argos road games and what they can do. They ever figure it out and get a team in Quebec City we will give Montreal and Quebec City the Labor Day rivalry game. But until then, it makes too much sense.
That might even be one of the biggest. That might even grow to be one of the biggest rivalry games in the league.
For sure. I mean, as I said, if you want more information or want to hear us talk about that, you can check out last week's episode as we talked about some of the big issues around the league. But let's focus in on the football right now because it is getting good in the 3-down game. First off, let's circle back to last weekend. Of course, you were in Montreal on Thursday covering the game between the Bombers and the Montreal Alouettes. Listen, this was a good spot for the Bombers to be in, going up against James Morgan, making his first start in the Canadian Football League. But this was also a team that had major issues on the defensive side of the football, lost 2 top receivers in the first half to the point that backup quarterback Chris Strebler was running routes. But it was the MOP, Brady Oliveira, taking over this football game with over 200 combined yards, really just simply refusing to lose, and a very efficient game from Zach Caleros, 27 of 31, had 1 drop, very, very effective overall. And the Bombers don't fade in the second half, win their second in a row, get to 6-4, and despite everything they're dealing with right now, Jeff, build a little bit of momentum going into this massive matchup against the Riders.
Yeah, I think before we talked so glowingly about the Bombers, I'm going to want to reiterate what you kind of mentioned off the top. This wasn't your Montreal Alouettes team last year. This isn't even your Montreal Alouettes team earlier this season. This is a team that was down to their 4th-string quarterback in James Morgan. And while James Morgan had a decent outing the week before, coming in as a relief player, throwing for over 200 yards, didn't have a turnover, didn't have an interception. So, you thought maybe he would carry that momentum into this game. He looked pedestrian. He looked like the team was playing their 4th-string quarterback. That puts a lot of stress on their defense. And this game was a 3-point game, Haas, in the 4th quarter. And to your point, I think that's one of the biggest, if not the biggest takeaway, is that the Bombers have had these second half struggles, have had this inability to close out games in the 4th quarter, and they did just that. They got up on a lead, a major touchdown from Brady Oliveira, his second in as many games, is only his second all season. He gets into the end zone, and then they work the clock from there. They give it to their best player, and it was one of those vintage Winnipeg Blue Bomber performances at the end of the game where everybody in the stadium, Haas, knew they were going to be running the ball, and the Montreal Alouettes defense couldn't stop the O-train from coming right up the middle and Brady Oliveira. And that was the impressive part of that. And I think that was a real energy booster to the team, particularly to the offense, and even more specifically to the offensive line. I thought this was a game from the offensive line that they needed. Pat Neufeld, a veteran offensive lineman on the team, told me after the game, he admitted as much too. No one really talked about how they needed this one, but everybody knew they needed a strong performance. They needed to go out there and get the job done, because if they would have choked out there, Haas, if they wouldn't have been able to beat a Montreal Alouettes team down to their 4th-stringer, there would have been major issues with this team. The narrative of this team stepping out of the spotlight would have only ramped up. Here they are now, a team that is climbing up there in the standings. Unfortunately for them, there's still 2 more teams ahead of them, but they put themselves in a position to make a second half run. Got some big games up here, but I think this was, even though it was against an inferior opponent, this was a massive result for the Blue and Gold, and one that they're going to want to take forward here with momentum and into a big home series.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the 4th quarter takeaways has to be huge for Winnipeg. And again, we can talk about a 4th-string quarterback. He wasn't on defense. That Montreal defense is good. They've been good all season long. And, when the cards were put on the table, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers were able to do what they really hadn't been able to do up until this point. And that was say, we're giving this ball to Brady Oliveira, try and stop us, and we don't think you can. And they did that. And listen, that 81-yard drive, 10 plays, mostly all of it on the ground, was the quintessential 4th quarter Winnipeg Blue Bomber drive behind an offensive line that certainly seemed to take a big step forward. And that is huge. And listen, their performance not only helped Brady have his big day, but I think we also have to talk about the performance Zach Caleros had, going 27 of 31, and give the O-line a big dap on that one as well. So the Bombers get to 6-4, have a bit of momentum. Needless to say, they're moving up a weight class or 2 going into Saskatchewan on the weekend. The one other thing quickly, Jeff, which was impressive that the Bombers were able to do this, is that, in comparison to some of the recent fourth quarters where they weren't at their best, this was the time where they were under the most adversity without their most reliable receiver, Nick Dembski, without Jarrett Stearns, who's become quite the target for Zach Collaros, and they were able to find a way and get it done. So to your point, this was one they absolutely had to have. They got it, and now they'll have a little bit of extra time with the Thursday game before they head out to Regina on the weekend. We'll talk about the Riders in just a minute, but we got to get to the Edmonton Elks.
I think before we even go there, Huss, just an update on that. Looks like Stearns is going to be out for the foreseeable future here. He's probably going to be on the shelf for a few weeks. I think they dodged a bullet with Nick Dembski. I know it's an upper body injury, but I'm thinking he's probably going to play this week. But in the meantime, they've signed Kyron Moore. Former Edmonton Elks player, played years in Saskatchewan. He's brought in to maybe ease some of that pain. That's going to tell you maybe the Stearns injury is a little bit longer than expected, but bit of a drastic situation in that game with, as you mentioned before, Chris Strevler lining up as receiver. You could see the smile through his helmet as he was having a ton of fun. Good for the Bombers for it to have a great result. But that's a testament to this team too, to be not only resilient at the end of the game, but in such unfortunate circumstances from an offensive side of things to still move the ball the way they did and close that game out, as you mentioned, was an impressive feat.
Yeah, and Moore, of course, had that ACL. He did not play last season. He was last playing in 2023. The Bombers also signed Cam Eccles, who was with the Calgary Stampeders last year. So we presume those guys will be in playoffs. And the big story around Winnipeg throughout as we get closer to the game will be the status of Dalton Schoen, in addition to Nick Dembski. And, considering how good week. That's the expectation.
He should be. The expectation is practicing this week. He's done his full stint. This is Dalton Schoen, of course, on the 6-game injured list. I'm fully expecting him to be at practice today and be playing this weekend.
Well, that's good news for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers because it's going to need all hands on deck if they want to find a way to win in Regina on Sunday afternoon. Hammer, as we continue to the Friday game, the Edmonton Elks keep rolling. You think about that drop pass 4 weeks ago with Julian Grant, which would have beat the Hamilton Tiger Cats. That would have been running the table for the Edmonton Elks. Now, listen, they didn't get that one. They fell to 1-6, but no quit behind Cody Fajardo, who once again comes up huge in the fourth quarter, and they win by 10. Now, just half a game back of the British Columbia Lions, who lost on the weekend. We'll touch on that one in a minute. And going into, dare I say, an opportunity for them to get right back into the thick of things when it comes to the playoffs. And that seemed almost inconceivable a month ago. But it's funny what and the importance of a quarterback can be to a team. And I mean, every week it seems like they're in close games, and come the fourth quarter, Cody Fajardo gets the job done, and he did it again against the Red Blacks.
I know everybody hates this. I find myself being one of the rare people I find that doesn't hate it, says it sometimes, disagrees with it sometimes, agrees with it sometimes, is that the season doesn't start until after Labor Day weekend. Well, I'm telling you right now, Huss, the Edmonton Elks, the Ottawa Red Blacks, the Toronto Argonauts are all going to try to prove that very notion that the games don't matter until the Labor Day weekend and after that, because these are three teams that are going to try to make this second half run and prove that some of the bad plays, some of the drop passes, whatever would have happened through the first half of the season doesn't happen in the second half of the season. So it'll be really interesting. And who's in a better position, Huss, than maybe the Edmonton Elks? We were talking about this before, about how because they were in the West, it was going to be a challenging situation for them. We'll look no further than the BC Lions. We'll get to them choking this week. They put Edmonton in not a good position, but in a position where they could probably control their own fate here if they can go on to a run. So this is a really interesting situation, Edmonton. You talk about bringing up the question, what happens if Julian Grant catches that ball and they win that game against Hamilton? What about if they would have started Cody Fajardo as their quarterback? I mean, This guy was losing games by the skin of his teeth and now has been putting wins together consistently. This team's now on a 3-game win streak. I'm not ready to proclaim they're legit. They have a very, very difficult road ahead of them. But for weeks, Huss, we were either ignoring them from this show or writing their obituary. Here we are, seeing signs of life from this organization, which was so needed after all the changes in the offseason, because all that doubt was creeping into the coaching staff, to the management, all the way up to the ownership. Well, that, again, the narrative still isn't glowing in Edmonton right now, but they're trending in the right direction, and they're bringing some of that excitement back to their season, and that was so important after such a putrid start to the year.
Well, it's funny when you say legit. I'll actually say they are legit. They're a legit CFL outfit right now. They have not been a legitimate CFL outfit dating back to, well, pretty much pre-Chris Jones. The stench of that era finally seems to be wafting away, and it's Cody Fajardo that's fanning the flames and clearing the air right now in Edmonton. But listen, they are moving up a weight class to take on Calgary. We'll get to that game in a minute. But the bottom line is they're moving things forward. They're seeing some positive returns. When I do the shows with the guys on Edmonton Sports Talk every day, you can tell the excitement that they just got a team that has a chance to win football games. And that's kind of where they had to start. And as we'll get to coming up when we talk Edmonton, Calgary, very, very interesting intangibles to this game. And of course, the coaching matchup of two very, very familiar foes. We've talked a lot about Cody Fajardo. Should mention, though, sometimes we don't spend enough time talking about special teams. And you look at that game, the 80-yard return by Javon Leake has to be, in a 10-point game, those 7 points were so massive for Edmonton to be able to get that lead and then put it away in the fourth quarter. So they aren't just doing it on the back of their quarterback.
They aren't, but I do think there's this minor thing here that I think is stopping me from going full hustler right now and saying they're legit. And I'll tell you why that is.
I'm not saying they're like a great
you just said they were a legitimate CFL outfit. Team.
Yeah, they have not been for 5 years. Can we agree that they at least
I'm not, dude, they did this last year. This is exactly the time of the year that the Elks turn things on because they get so desperate to get back into the playoff picture that they have no other choice but to string together wins. This has happened the last few years. I can remember going into Edmonton for Bomber games and the buzz being about the Elks and not Winnipeg because they had a better run at that moment. I'm not saying that this isn't a team that couldn't get it done necessarily. I'm not buying in because this 3-game win streak, which was imperative, which was incredibly important to them climbing out of the hole they put themselves in earlier this year, has come against Montreal, Toronto, and Ottawa. The bad teams in the league. Montreal is arguably the worst team in the CFL right now, given their quarterback situation. Toronto and Ottawa are statistically the worst teams in the league based on their records. And those are the 3-game win streaks. So I think there is a reality check coming to Edmonton with Calgary here in back-to-back weeks, Haas. And in 2 weeks' time, we could be writing again the Elks obituary of the season. But I will not rain on their parade right now, even though I have been here. I do think, to your point, it's injected excitement in. It's gotten that pulse back in the fan base that's so needed right now for them. They need their fans to get behind them. They are up in a tough matchup here. Battle of Alberta, heading into Labor Day weekend. But here's the fun part. Here's the best part if you're an Edmonton Elks player. You have the potential in these two, what will be very, very emotional games, to shift the narrative on your entire season. If you can get back to 500 with back-to-back victories against the Calgary Stampeders, you are laughing. But that is a very, 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 very tall ask, and it'll be very interesting to see how close they can get to that goal, which will be very tough against a good Calgary team.
Again, we'll get to this game in a minute, but I think even a split would keep them very much alive. And the one difference, and listen, I get what you're saying because I do remember those games against the Bombers last year. It was a month later. It was late September, and they had won a couple games, and they were still technically alive for the playoffs, which is very different to me than going on a 3-game win streak in August into Labor Day and legitimately having an opportunity not to need to win out and have someone else lose every game to make it, but have something under your own control. The Bombers, The Bombers and Elks last year played back-to-back late in September. Bombers won 27-14 on the 21st, and then they did it again in Winnipeg, and that was the 50 burger. We'll get to a 50 burger in a minute. 55-27 over Edmonton. Well, speaking of 50 burger, this was the game that probably killed me. My worst pick of the week last week. I thought that BC was rolling. I thought Nathan Rourke was going to be taking over this game, and hand up, I'd pretty much written off the Toronto Argonauts after another loss last week. I mean, 2-8 without their starting quarterback. Well, somebody forgot to tell Nick Arbuckle and the Toronto Argonauts. And this is a wild game, Jeff. I mean, Nathan Rourke and the BC Lions ran the table. Boom. First two drives, touchdown. They're up 14-6. And anyone that had BC minus 3.5, hand up, was thinking, all right, it's Aaron's time. We'll just kind of watch the score. Things should be good. By the time we got to halftime, Toronto was up by a touchdown, and they never looked back. An absolute disaster for the British Columbia defense. And as great as their quarterback is and as lethal as their offense is when it's clicking, if you're giving up 50 burgers, Jeff, you're not winning football games right now. And, you know, with Edmonton's win and BC's loss, never mind Winnipeg winning, BC finds themselves just a half game out of last place in the division. This could be a real costly one for BC down the road. And, listen, credit where credit is due. Another nearly 450 yards by Nick Arbuckle. He's an incredible story this year, despite the record of his team so far.
Yeah, I mean, I was with you. I thought I was buying into that momentum that the BC Lions were building, right? They, unlike the team we just discussed in Edmonton, there was some better victories for the BC Lions, including against those Hamilton Tiger Cats in their run. And I thought the way Nathan Rourke was playing, we were talking about him playing his way back into the MOP conversation. And as you mentioned, the way that game started, it looked like it was going to be a runaway. Even it looked like it was going to be a 50-50 game, to be honest with you, because both teams weren't having much difficulty moving the ball downfield. Even Toronto early on, they were getting field goals, but they weren't having a hard time moving the ball downfield. And then it just became a one-sided game. I mean, whether it was Nick Arbuckle and what did he finish with? 430 passing yards? That's a career high.
I think it's 443.
Is it 443?
I think they might have adjusted it afterwards because it was 430.
It was already a career high. So anything higher than that, which is
443, 3 TDs, no picks.
Yeah, 3 TDs, no picks. Like, I mean, he's been playing. He's not been the issue here, right? I mean, this team needs Chad Kelly back because I think he brings a certain swagger and skill set to it, but it hasn't been the play of Nick Arbuckle that's been this team's issue. So he was once again moving the ball, and to do it, Haas, without DeMonte Coxey in the lineup. I thought that was going to be a big deal here. This is a guy who's leading the league or is up there with Keon Hatcher and leading the league in receiving yards. Is such a dynamic guy. And I thought they were really going to be in trouble, Haas, because in games that they trailed, it was like they would go into video game mode and they would just toss the ball to one player, right? It was just Coxey that was getting the ball. Kevin Mattel had a big game. He got his swagger back after a few off games. They just kept moving the ball downfield, and that was an impressive play. But it was really, to me, while the offense and Mike Benavides, I don't think his seat's necessarily warm for the BC Lions per se, but that's one. Oh. That's a tough ride home on the plane after the game when your team is just unable to stop anything. But credit also belongs to the Argos defense. I mean, the Argos defense, particularly their front, stepped up big time. Rourke was under siege for that entire second half, and they just completely wiped them out. It was that one play in particular, the forced fumble that turned over the game, or that turned over the ball, that you knew the game was over at that point, right? This was going to be Toronto's game, and then they rode into victory. So while it creates some life here for Toronto, we'll see what happens here. Maybe this can be that game-changing result that they need, the confidence that they've been missing perhaps. But if you're the BC Lions, 5-6 does not look good at this juncture. And after all the growth you had shown in recent weeks, to lay an egg to the worst team in the league right now in Toronto is not going to be a culture builder. So lots to think about over in BC, especially when you see the Edmonton Elks doing what they're doing.
I'm just looking to see what the time of possession in this game was, because when you go through the stats of the game, the like, just to give you an idea about how efficient this Argo offense was, Spencer Brown had 19 carries for 85 yards, so a 4.5 average, not bad. He got in for a touchdown. Arbuckle was 27 of 34 for the 443. They had 2 receivers. Herslow had a monster game, 5 catches for 149, 2 TDs. Brissett had 4 catches, 118. Both of those players had 4 or 5 catches and averaged over 29 yards a catch. So they were getting big chunks on explosion plays, and they were doing it all afternoon at the expense of that BC defense.
You mentioned the time of a game. I looked at it, and while it is lopsided in favor of Toronto with the 33-18 to 26-42, to your point, I felt like every time BC did something, the Toronto just answered back harder and quicker. It was just like massive chunk plays, and the only time they were chewing up was really when they were coming up and designing their plays in the red zone. That was, to me, the biggest difference here. And Herslow, talk about a guy who's had that momentum really dating back to a few weeks ago when he did that, when he hurdled that player, like cleared him by like a 1.5 feet and kept running. That was foreshadowing for what was to come here, but it's been good things for him. And that really is the bread and butter of Toronto, right? Their depth, their scouting staff. That's really what they've been doing over their success in recent years, right? People forget this is a team that is one Grey Cup away. If they can figure things out, it won't be easy this year. Grey Cup away from being considered a dynasty. Like, would 3 Grey Cups in 4 years be considered a dynasty? Well, this dynasty era would be fascinating if you actually looked at the members on the team, because unlike in Winnipeg, where they've gone just 5 straight Grey Cups and the turnover has been fairly minimal, it's been almost complete roster turnovers in Toronto, to the point where you have different quarterbacks, different leaders. It's not the same outfit. That's, again, speaks to the testament, or that's a testament to the scouting staff and their ability to turn over their roster as often, as frequent as they do.
Well, Ryan Dinwiddie's been pretty pissed off after a bunch of games this year. He was obviously very happy with the performance of his team in what could be a season-saving victory over BC to get to 3-8, and still in the mix for 3rd place, but they do have to stay ahead of 2 teams in the West, or at least tied with the 4th place team in the West if they want to make sure that they've got that spot. The final game of the week was, of course, the main event, the battle at the top of the West Division. The 1-loss Saskatchewan Roughriders heading to Calgary to take on the only team that had beat them of the season. And I don't know, it seemed like maybe the shine had come off the Stamps a little bit. They reminded everybody that their first half was no fluke. The Calgary defense completely taking over in the second half and allowing a goose egg on the board for Saskatchewan. Calgary wins it running away. And now the Calgary Stampeders are knocking on the door. And incredibly, Jeff, as I said, this was a possibility. We could be here saying the Calgary Stampeders, who were the longest odds on the board to win the Grey Cup at the start of the year, not only are they the favorites right now at Coolbet at plus 240 to win the Grey Cup, they are 5-0 against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and the Saskatchewan Roughriders at Labor Day, which is a stunning number.
Yeah, it's insane. I don't know if what our friends over at Coolbet, what they would have had to come up with to create a odds for going 5-0 against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and of course the Saskatchewan Roughriders. But it would have been a nice little payout for sure. I think this game was massive for Calgary, right? It proved a couple different things. One more minor, but still significant to a certain degree, is that, man, don't bet against these guys coming off a bye, right? They did it against Winnipeg. They did it against the Red Hot Riders. And the other thing is they're the best team in the league. They're 2 points behind. They're 2 points behind the Riders in the standings, but the Riders have 2 losses, both of which have come against Calgary this season, right? So the team ahead of them is a team that they've already clinched the season series on, have won the first 2 games here. This is a team that's rolling, and I think it's going to be a very interesting situation for Saskatchewan here as they welcome the Winnipeg Blue Bombers down. We'll get into that game later, but this is all of a sudden at 8-2, there's a little bit of adversity here for Saskatchewan. Obviously, they have a long rope here for all the success they've had earlier in the season, But when you look at their inability to, to play against or to beat Calgary, and that extends us to Trevor Harris. He's got a horrible record against the Calgary Stampeders over his career. Obviously, that dates back to the era of different quarterbacks, different teams. But this VA era, I'm telling you right now, by the end of the year here, I will not be surprised if we see Calgary leapfrogging Saskatchewan for that first place. They'll, maybe Saskatchewan will have to do everything in their power to prevent that, of course, and hope that whoever Calgary plays in the West Final, they take care of them first, right? Because that would probably be their best bet. But Calgary is the real deal, and I love everything about that team right now.
Well, the irony of this whole thing is that the biggest ally to the Calgary Stampeders moving forward is the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, because there's 3 head-to-head matchups between Winnipeg and Sask, and of course Calgary and Winnipeg are finished their season series with Calgary running the table, going 3-0 against Winnipeg. Listen, before we get to the game picks at Coolbet, when we'll look at the lines for Labor Day weekend, a couple of other big stories coming out of the weekend. We should mention a very scary, and this is part of pro football, incident on Friday night, late in the game. Serious injury to Daniel Okpoko, who was carted off the field. I thought the Friday Night Football team did a really good job of kind of stepping away from the very important time in the game and speaking about the human element. I'll give Luke Wilson credit. I mean, as a former player, they brought him on during that break, and he talked about, what it's like to be on the sideline when you see what could be a very serious, potentially career-ending injury and what that does to players on the sidelines. But, the bottom line is, I guess, apparently, I hadn't heard a lot, Jeff, but some good news for Okpoko, who, as everyone was really concerned about him as he left the field on Friday.
Yeah, I ended up, obviously a scary moment. He was immobilized, put on a cart, moved to the hospital where he was eventually stabilized and cleared, right? I guess the best case scenario, or the scenario you certainly want out of this. I give credit to Luke Wilson too, handled that as well. I think you see it from both sides, right? Everybody who plays this game, everyone who dedicates their life to this game, everybody who uses this game to feed their families, to have a paycheck, understands the uncertainty of the sport, right? And how every single play could lead to something like this. So it's just another one of those reminders of really how violent the game is and how precious it is to have have your time and to compete and all those things. So it's always, it's always, it's interesting too. We were talking off mic about it. It's usually a lull in the game. This happened with 2:40 left in the game, right? In a pretty important, situation in the game. So, I think the league handled it incredibly well, not just from a broadcasting situation, but a safety situation, right? They didn't rush. Nothing felt rushed in this. It was all handled accordingly. And the result here was obviously, a positive one given the circumstances.
Yeah. Listen, to your point, it was a huge point in the game. And, I believe the Elks were up by 7 at the time, but it was a 2nd and long. And Cody Fajardo came in on that first play after the long break at Curly Gittins for about 40. Got them into field goal range and pretty much iced that win for them. But certainly we'll be wishing the best for Daniel Okpoko as he looks to get back on his feet. And, we'll see what is next for him. NFL cuts are happening right now around the league. Every team is probably paying attention to a player or two. Here in Winnipeg, Ontario Wilson had that breakout season last year for the Bombers, signed with the Winnipeg Jets. Or the New York Jets, I should say, not quite at Winnipeg Jets season. And he has been released, Jeff. The Bombers just signed 2 receivers, as we alluded to earlier, with the injuries they had this week. Might Ontario be back in Winnipeg soon, or is this often we see guys kind of hang around a little bit longer, seeing if there's another option somewhere south of the border?
Yeah, it's essentially what's happening here with Ontario Wilson. Like any player that makes it this far, right, has to right around the corner from the season starting. So it wasn't like he got his walking papers, before camp started. He's been there. Unfortunately for him, he was one of the cuts for the Jets. But you usually stick around. You start, having some conversations. I don't know where exactly his head's at as far as wanting to stick around and see if he can jump onto a roster here in the NFL. And obviously that will depend on the interest. I'm sure there will be an effort from his agent to reach out to other teams, see what the interest might be, see if he can get some workouts, see if he can do whatever. but I don't see him dragging his feet. And I don't see a point for Ontario Wilson dragging his feet, given the success he's had in the CFL. And you know that the most important thing at his age is to put his skills on tape. We also know it's very important to earn a paycheck. And while, getting on a practice roster would certainly be a step towards making a roster, but would also be a boost in the earning situation. But when you look what's happening in Winnipeg, and of course the Bombers, who have his rights if he does return to the CFL, they're in his, you know that they've sent a message out to his camp. They probably give a little bit of a grace period, or the message is, hey, you always have us here. Remember, we love you here in Winnipeg, and best of luck out there, but we'd love to have you back. So I think at this point it's a decision about Wilson, right? Is he going to want to stick around in the NFL? Is he going to, what is that interest look like? Is there a point to doing that, or is it better off for him to come back to the CFL, join a team that desperately needs a receiver, and continue to put that game film on and then try to go back to the NFL after the CFL season? It's an interesting situation, but I won't be surprised. I wouldn't expect him here right away, but I also wouldn't rule him out for the rest of the year.
I'm sure there's plenty of texts coming from a 204 area code to Ontario Wilson's phone saying, get your ass on a plane, get up here. I mean, they did sign two receivers. The difference with Wilson is he was with this team last year. I mean, it might take a week.
Slide into the starting lineup in a week, if that.
Exactly. I mean, a totally different scenario than someone coming in that hasn't been in that room with this team before.
And they probably overpay him because of the need. Like that's, yeah. I think it would be a massive get.
Just before we get to the picks, we're just on the other side of the midway point of the season. What team has surprised you the most this year?
I mean, it's such an easy answer. It's the Calgary Stampeders. I was leaving them for dead. I had them as the team that wasn't going to make the playoffs, the team that wasn't going to fix their locker room issues, their cultural issues. Like, I thought it was going to be a bad situation. I thought it was going to be Dave Dickinson's final season in Calgary. And whoa, was I wrong. There's no other answer for me than that one. I'm sure that's probably where you lie, Huss, too. But where would you go? Correct me if I'm wrong, but if it's not, where would you go outside of that?
I will Barry Horowitz myself a little bit with the pat on the back and remind everyone, and you can watch this in our previous season. I thought that the writing the Calgary Stamps off, as so many people did, was very premature.
You were on the V8 train and the MOP talk early on because of his odds.
Well, but it's odds, and I just thought that there was a window. It's the CFL. I mean, to think this team is just going to be terrible again with a guy like Vernon Adams coming in I thought there was, put it this way, though, to have them be 5-0, I mean, everything that we've talked about, Calgary certainly is that team. I mean, they've advanced so much more than anything anyone that thought is possible. But the biggest surprise to me, in a good and a bad way, I'll go with the Toronto Argonauts. First of all, I think as an individual, Nick Arbuckle's season right now, despite being 3-8, has been, I think he's about 500 yards clear of anybody else in the league, passing wise. I mean, he's
on pace for more than 5,000.
Like monster game after monster game. But what I think is the most surprising is the fact that hasn't turned into more wins. And listen, it's been well documented on CFL 10, the frustrations and the ways the Argos have lost games. But I got to tell you, putting up 52 on BC last weekend, knowing how weak the East is, knowing what is to come from them, certainly no one seems to be banging on the door saying, oh, we just need Chad Kelly back. Arbuckle has been as proficient as any quarterback this year, if not more. Just a matter of mixing in a few more stops. And it seems like this defense certainly did what they needed to do against a heck of a player in Nathan Rourke. So I'll go with Toronto for the wrong reasons as a team, but on a real positive side, their quarterback in Nick Arbuckle, who's been phenomenal this year. And for a guy that thought that he probably was done at the end of last year to win the Grey Cup and then to play like this, it truly is a great CFL story. All right, let's get to Labor Day weekend, Hammer. 3 games on the docket. We start on Sunday in Regina. We will both be there, one in the press box, one in the stands. It is the Labor Day Classic, the biggest rivalry game in the Canadian Football League. It starts a back-to-back series, which will conclude with the Banjo Bowl the following weekend here in Winnipeg. The Saskatchewan Roughriders are 5.5-point favorites. and minus 250 on the money line. The Blue Bombers 2-1 to win, and 5.5-point dogs. Total for the game is 51.5. What do you think about the early line on the Labor Day Classic?
I'm gonna pull an early shocker move. I'm passing the ball right back to your chest. I want you to go first on this. I'll even drag my sentence out here so you can put your thoughts together on this one.
Oh, I have my thoughts together on this.
I want you to go first on this just because I'm that unsure of my pick right now. It's going to be in the I almost feel like I want to take your opinion and either roll with it or counter it. I don't have an authentic thought on this game. I'm so confused by it, to be honest with you. Well, I want you to lead.
I mean, listen, first of all, it should be great. They're expecting 34,000 plus, the biggest crowd in the history of Mosaic Stadium. So I certainly expect the
that's
fans
because it's sorry to interrupt, but that's because it's standing. They're selling standing only tickets. That's obviously a new thing in Regina.
I'll be honest, I don't know how many games they were selling out to get to that
but
point
even just the
that.
notion of having a standalone ticket, so you don't even have to, you can buy a standalone. I saw this on social media. I think it's a first in Riderville. It's not a first for professional sports teams, including I think Winnipeg has a social ticket, right? That you can just go to be at the world's biggest or the province's biggest social. But I think they're now selling those tickets is added to it. That's amazing. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the more asses in seats and the more people at the game and like for teams, I mean, even if you're not going to get into a seat and you're partying and you're paying attention to the game and you're buying 5 or 6 beers, I mean, totally. It's good for the bottom line, good for the atmosphere of the game.
Show up at halftime. Anyways, back to the prediction.
So for this game, first of all, I think they nailed it. I was doing guess the lines with Dusty yesterday before I'd seen it. I thought Sask would be able to 6-point favorite, 5.5 right now. I've seen anywhere from as high as 6.5 or 7. This to me sounds right. I was thinking 6, as I said. To me, I mean, obviously, if we had a pie chart, there's a number of possibilities. I do think a rather large slice of the pie is that a pissed off Rider team gets on. And maybe this is PTSD from other Labor Day Classics that I've been at before. But sometimes in that building, in this rivalry, in either game, when the home team gets going, running downfield, it can be a long, long day for the visitors. And listen, with what we've seen from the Bombers so far this year, with the adversity they're dealing with, both on their defense and now in their receiving core, this is a really, really tough ask to go in and win this football game. But we've seen it before. You can throw the records out. That being said, I think there is a large chance that Saskatchewan wins, and it's not really close. I mean, 2 touchdowns plus. The Bombers also have a pie in this chart where they go in and play their best game of the season, which is what it's going to take to beat Saskatchewan in Saskatchewan. Make no mistake about it. And find ways to win. I think the performance of Brady Oliveira last week shows that, we know what we're going to get from Brady, and that offensive line. I mean, I don't think there's a more important game of the entire year that your offensive line needs to be ready to go from a Bomber perspective than this one, because it is loud. The Riders have a hell of a defense, and they are jacked up, and it's a full 60-minute job to protect your quarterback and to be able to move the football. The fact that Calgary beat them again last week, I think, is not a great development for Winnipeg. Now, I'm not saying that Saskatchewan, if they were 9-1, would have been sitting there reading all their own news clippings and not prepare properly, but I do think they got a bit of a reality check after an 8-1 start, which I think is going to make it that much more difficult for Winnipeg. Listen, I'm a Bomber guy. I will not be racing to Coolbet to bet the Riders, but taking myself away from any allegiances, looking at this game, gun to my head, 5.5 points, I think the pick is Saskatchewan in the Labor Day Classic this year. And that's the first time in a while that I've really felt that way.
Yeah, you know what? I don't know if I needed it, but it helped what you just said. I think I'm with you. Here's what it comes down to, Huss. It was a 3-point game against the Montreal Alouettes, against their fourth-string quarterback in the fourth quarter on Thursday, right? The game that we're viewing as like a turnaround game for the Bombers, their most complete complimentary game, and, expected to be given those circumstances. So how do we expect them to go into Regina in a season that they just seem to be making the most bizarre plays, the most bizarre decisions, where things haven't gone right really at all, even though they're in a better position record-wise than they were at this point last year, and go into a raucous crowd atmosphere in Saskatchewan against a team who's going to be pissed off that they lost to Calgary, that is going to want to make sure that they don't allow their biggest rivals to catch up to them, right? Because they still have that breathing room here. But if they lose that game to Winnipeg, that breathing room all of a sudden becomes a bit tight and then puts the pressure back on them in Winnipeg the next week in the Banjo Bowl rematch. So this is a very tough situation. I think the Bombers don't rise to the occasion on it. I'm not saying they won't. I just think it's so tough for them, and they're going to have a pissed off situation, and I think they're going to have their hands full. So even if they do win this game, I'm not saying I'm not with you. Like, I do think there's a chance that they get their butts kicked, but I also think there's a chance if they can lean on their O-line, who's coming off, as you mentioned, one of their best games, if they can get the ball to Brady Oliveira. Obviously, I mentioned earlier in the show, Dalton Schoen's expected to play this week. That's an added boost to the line. If they can keep it close, that's going to be the biggest key to Winnipeg here, is keeping these games close in the final quarter. I will add on to the fact that Saskatchewan, it was more so a pattern earlier in the year, was struggling to put teams away late and still have a kicker who is struggling massively in Brett Lauther, and this is going to
we're talking
a very, very, very eyes on him game, right? There's going to be, the stakes are incredibly high just based on the opponent. So all those things come into play. I'm not saying the Bombers are shoo-ins to win, but I think there's an opportunity for them to cover. So as I started this conversation thinking, you know what? Maybe I'm with you. They're going to get their butts kicked. I am going to do this with very, very little confidence, but for the reasons I mentioned at the end of this rant, I'm going to take the Bombers plus 5.5 points.
Hey, listen, I mean, as I said, there are many possibilities of this game.
Because what if Lauther leaves 9 or 12 points on the board?
Oh, well, listen,
Off the board,
minute you mentioned the kicking game, I got myself going. Mark my words. Listen, I'm telling you, the gun to my head, removing myself from the situation, I would take the Riders minus 5.5 early in the week. Mark my words, by the time I get my ass into one of those seats, I will have a Bomber ticket at Cool Bet going in there. And I'll
You'll justified it.
Sergio kicked that bomb last year to win the game. I'm very glad you brought up the kicking game, because if this game is close, which it very well could be, if this game is close, the season that Brett Lauther has had, don't think that is not going to be in his head a little bit more than any other game. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, there is nobody more nails than Sergio Castillo when it comes to the big kicks, the long kicks, winning kicks. Despite what happened against Ottawa, he got his chance to walk it off. They did. And I know his mother-in-law's been in town. I saw him at the baseball game. He's been crushing those homemade flour tortillas. So he's going to have a little extra juice in his leg for the Labor Day Classic. Moving on to Monday, the early game in Tim Hortons Field, the Hamilton Tiger Cats, who have slipped a little bit, a couple tough losses. They now come off a little bit more rest, and they take on the Argos, who in a lot of ways saved their season, at least made this game meaningful with their win last week. The big question, Jeff, is can Nick Arbuckle and this offense continue the momentum they built against BC into a very difficult place to play and find a way to win and get a little bit closer to a playoff spot for the Canadian Football League against Bo Levi Mitchell and the Ticats, who have been the best team in the East so far this year.
Remind me of the line.
It is 5.5 for Hamilton. Toronto plus 5.5.
See, that's an interesting line to me. I like Hamilton coming off the bye week. I like Hamilton just because I think they're a better team. They're a better team in the standings. They've taken some knocks here a little bit in the last bit. And Toronto, they're playing at home. So for me, all those things factor into it. I know what Toronto was able to do last week against a not so great outfit in BC. I mean, the BC is pretty decent. They were better before that game than I feel about them after that game. So there is a lot to build off on. You mentioned Ryan Dinwiddie has called out his team. What we haven't seen from Toronto is consistency. We haven't seen consistency week to week, right? So to expect them to just turn a hot second half in BC into a convincing road victory or even a close one to their rival Hamilton, I don't know. Maybe they can do it. Maybe, I've said this before on many occasions. Ryan Dinwiddie, to me, is the best CFL coach there is. He's going to come up with a good game plan, but I just feel like Hamilton will have the answer. And if it gets into a shootout, Huss, Hamilton is one of those teams that can erase leads, right? It can erase, can do a lot of damage in a short amount of time. So while I'm not loving the 5.5 points, I'm switching my mind right off the bat. I'm taking Toronto. I think it's going to be closer. I'm going to ride the momentum. I don't know why I was leading into an end there on Hamilton. I'm completely 180ing it because I don't feel comfortable with it. I might lose this one, but in that last minute, my brain just switched over. As I think of Toronto, I just think these two teams, this is the CFL, Huss. This is Labor Day weekend. Throw out the records. Throw out the history. These are two teams that hate each other, and it's going to be a punch back and forth. So I'm taking the points with Toronto because even in a situation, if Toronto's down, I don't think Hamilton has a good enough defense to stop the Argos attack. And what we saw them doing against BC can cover any, even if they're down a couple touchdowns, I think they can cover. I think this would be, to me, a potential backdoor cover if it's not a tight game throughout the 4 quarters.
Yeah, you know what? You took the words right out of my mouth. And listen, this is another one of those games where there is an element to throwing the records out. These teams know each other well. This is a special game. It'll be
I don't know
full.
what I was thinking.
Last year, I'm just checking this up. Last year, after Hamilton had that terrible start to the season, basically in the Argos position, they were able to win by a field goal, 31-28. Listen, I think Hamilton is the better team. I'll kind of echo everything that you said, but here's the thing. With the Argo offense humming the way that it is right now with Nick Arbuckle, it's going to take a lot to cover a 6-point spread. And then to your final point, I mean, even if it's a 10 or 14 point game late, the Argos will not take the foot off the gas. And I think there is the possibility of making it close at the end, even if it is a backdoor. So I'm here for some excitement. I'm here for some drama. I'm here for a close game. So let's take the Argos at plus 5.5 in this one, which brings us to the finale, and it is the Battle of Alberta. And a month or two ago, this did not look like this would be that interesting of a football game at all. It's a little different now with the Elks taking care of business with 3 straight against the East, and now they move up a weight class and get a chance to battle their prairie rivals for the first time. The Stampeders are 6.5 point favorites in this game. One of the most interesting side stories about this whole game is, of course, Mark Killam, the longtime Calgary assistant, who is now the head coach of the Edmonton Elks. But to me, this is about Cody Fajardo and what he's done to Edmonton since he's come in, given them a chance to win each and every game, have pulled off the last 3. There's a new level of confidence, I think, and expectations. And here's the other thing, Jeff. As the Edmonton offense has gotten better, what you've seen is the defense on the field less, and the defense playing at a much higher level. And you can look at their points given up, 38, 35, 28, 20. They're really trending in a great direction. Now, listen, they're going up against VA. That is a big time jump up in level of opposition as to what they've been going through in the East and the quarterbacks that they've been playing. I don't know. I'm really buying into Cody making this team competitive. I don't think they probably win this game, but I also don't think that they get ran all over. And much like we just talked about in the Toronto game, Cody's been at his best in the 4th quarter. So even if they are down by a couple touchdowns, The Elks certainly aren't quitting. Fajardo won't quit. And I do think there's the potential of getting this in on the back door. I thought that this number might be more than a touchdown just with what Calgary's done and their impressive win last week against Saskatchewan. But there is something to be said for what Edmonton has been doing, albeit let's see them test themselves against one of the big boys in the West. We'll find that out. I'm leaning to take the dog and the +6.5 right now as we kick this off early in the week. Well, what's your feeling on the Battle of Alberta?
I think the Elks come crashing back down to life.
Yeah, it's definitely possible.
I think you're telling me that Calgary just needs to score one. When you put it this way, one more touchdown than the Edmonton Elks. I think it's doable. I think it's more than doable. I think this is going to be, again, a reality check for Edmonton, who has gone through the basement essentially of the CFL, where they currently lie. I'll remind you, to carve out this 3-game win streak. Right? They haven't been impressive victories to me. They've been victories. They've been important victories. They haven't been impressive victories. So in that regard, and given what we saw with Calgary, the appetite they're going to have at home, the pursuit they're going to want to make to take over that top spot, right? They're not looking to slow down anytime soon. They're in a race for first, and they want to be in that position. So I don't see an Edmonton team coming into Calgary and doing much damage. And while I think Cody Fajardo gives them the best opportunity, and we might see another heroic performance from him, I think Calgary's defense is far too great to let that happen. And when you look at what they've been doing all season long, I think this is going to be an easy victory. In fact, I think this is going to be a 10-point plus victory and an absolute statement to the Elks, who are going to be really looking into the matchup the next week.
Yeah, well, I mean, they do go back-to-back in this one. And, for all the positives that the Elks have gained over the last month, I'm getting smashed by your interprovincial rival, could be a real comeback to earth moment. But I'm going to ride with Edmonton to, go in and make this one a game. And we'll see. Total in that one, by the way, is 52.5. I just quickly back to the Toronto-Hamilton game for a minute. The total for this one is 56.5. How high would this need to get for you to consider taking the under?
68.5 points, and I still don't feel comfortable, to be honest with you. Now that sounds like a major sales pitch to go for the over, and I guess technically it is, but this is what happens when these two teams play. They just go knockout punch after knockout punch. It's Labor Day Classic, man. It's during the day. It's just one of those games where it's 14-14 before the first quarter's over. It's just that's what happens when these two teams play. And with the way Nick Arbuckle's been throwing the ball, the way Bo Levi Mitchell's been throwing the ball, the way both teams have been ignoring their run game, why wouldn't this be a banger, right? 50 points in the CFL now is nothing, right? It's nothing. Talk about that game we were watching with Toronto, I thought it was going to get to 100 points. That's what it felt like. To ask for half of that with two teams that love chucking the ball, that love putting up points, whose defense can be good, but more often haven't been this year. Yeah, I think it's a pretty safe bet that you're, working with 2 or 3 points in that 50 range, where it would be if it was 52, what would it take for you not to take the over, right? So I think that one feels pretty good for the over.
Well, what about the total for Winnipeg Sask at 51.5?
It's always, you know what? I've been to the last 10. It's impossible to predict the game. And what happens are either it's a kicker's battle, right? It's been a kicker's battle. 19-15. 19-15, 21-17, those kind of games. Or there's just the nuttiest shit happens, Huss, where it's there's 3 return touchdowns. There's 2 defensive touchdowns. Obviously not 5 touchdowns outside of the offense combined in the game, but there's always that impact where it's going to be there's always massive returns in the Labor Day, right? That sets you up for scoring touchdowns. So that's kind of that game. It's tough to predict for me when I've seen so many. Those are two teams that have the potential of being this defensive kind of kickers. They play the field position game kind of style, or it can be not necessarily a blowout, but we can see points come from other places outside of the offense.
Yeah, I'll say this. If the Bombers are going to win this game or even cover, I think we're looking at an over, because I do think that, with what Saskatchewan's offense
they're going to be hard. Yeah, I think Saskatchewan's going to put. That's what you do with the over. How much points can you expect from each team? I don't see Saskatchewan taking their foot off the gas.
No, and I mean, you just think back to last year. I mean, it was the big kick that had the Bombers win 35-33 in one of the great recent Labor Day Classic games. So, hey, I tell you what, let's get some exciting games. Let's get a ton of points, get some overs, and have a great Labor Day weekend. And then, of course, we'll be back picking off the cobwebs, hopefully no worse for wear, from the Labor Day weekend in Regina, Jeff. And we'll get ready for the rematches next week. And, of course, the Banjo Bowl here in Winnipeg. We're on other sides. We'll figure something out, though, and we'll cook it up at CoolBet. If you go to coolbet.com, you'll see in the combo cards CFL 110 and more options, especially in and around Labor Day weekend. And again, if you haven't played a CoolBet before, give it a shot. We've got some great promos and contests. We've got poker games monthly at Winnipeg Sports Talk through the CoolBet platform. Use the promo code WST on your first deposit for a 100% bonus up to $200 on your first deposit. Hammer, have a great week. I know people, if they want to follow the Bombers, he'll have all the coverage all week long heading into the Labor Day Classic at winnipegfreepress.com. And I will see you, my friend, in Regina, and then back here, same time, same place next week to get ready for the Banjo Bowl and more in the CFL.
Yeah, looking forward to it, man. As I said off the top of the show, easily the most exciting weekend in the CFL regular season. Looking forward to heading out to Regina. As you mentioned, it's going to be an absolute buzzing atmosphere. I hope the weekend is equally as enjoyable, and look forward to sitting down with you and others and taking it all in.
And hey, Bomber fans and Rider fans, we'll have a big crew from Winnipeg Sports Talk out there with a couple buses and the 1930 crew at Hustlerama. Hit us up on social media, and it is always a good time. We'll be out and about. Would love to hoist one with you before the big game. And of course, there's no tailgate party in the CFL like Wayne's World before the game. We'll be there before as well. That is going to do it for us on CFL 110. Thanks to producer Connor Rabchak, our presenting sponsor at CoolBet, and of course, all of you for hanging out with us today. For Jeff Hamilton, I'm Andrew Paterson. We'll see you next week right here on CFL 110. Enjoy the Labor Day weekend.